Okay, so how was life like in the 50s?
Well, in the 50s, I guess I should say, I graduated from high school in 1950, and I graduated from college in 1954. So the 50s, during the first part of the 50s, I was in college. Um, and in college, the college I went to, the rules were pretty strict for girls, much more strict than they became later. I had to sign in and out if I was going going out on a date or something, and the boys I dated had to be on an approved list, had to be known to my house mother, and no drinking. Um, anyway, it was it was a time that was much more had many more rules than there are now. Um, I'm trying to think what else is really so different. Well, of course, there was no um, television. There was television, but television was only network channels, so you could get 3 channels. There wasn't any PBS, just ABC, NBC, and CBS. My father was interested in television, and so we always had the latest set, which still didn't have that big a screen, and was black and white, of course. It was after the war, the World War II. In 1953, I went to Europe in the summer, and was on a student tour, so I met with other students. And Europe at that point was still suffering the effects of the Second World War. In England, it was very difficult to get decent food. Everything was still pretty much rationed. If you had eggs, they were likely to be powdered eggs, and mixed with water. They were terrible. They were really awful. And in France and Germany, people were still struggling. In Germany, cities had been bombed and people were living in the ruins. That was true in London, too. There were large areas of bombed out streets and houses, buildings. So you could see what a devastating war it had been. But people were beginning to recover. Let's see, what else?
1 second. Can you just go outside for a little bit? I'll be out there in 1 second. Really? I'll come see you in a minute, okay? All right, go back outside. 1 sec. I'll tell you when I get out.
Okay, let's see. Do you have any other questions about what
So how did the bomb affect you
me?
and your family?
Well, we didn't have drills at that. I was too old for that in college. We didn't have drills. People thought about it a lot, I think. There was some idea that we ought to have controls on it. And actually, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the bomb. It wasn't until the 60s, when there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, that we thought very much about it. We had thought about other things, other kinds of warfare during World War II. But I was in college, and it was fairly isolated. And we didn't think about it very much. In the rest of the 50s, after I graduated from college, I spent a year in England, and I think people there were still not really, it wasn't very real, though there were talks with Russia, and it was the Cold War, and people were afraid of communists, and there was all of that. But the bomb itself, I don't know. It didn't affect me that much as I look back. After a year in England in 1956, 7, I went back and worked in New York for a year. And New York in the late 50s was a lot of fun. It was one thing about New York in the 50s is that it was I felt that it was very safe. I lived alone in an apartment on the Lower East Side after a while, and I would go home on the train to Maryland and come back at night with my suitcase, and I would take the subway and then walk home. And I was never really afraid. I probably should have been, but to be out by myself with a big suitcase on the streets of New York at night at 11 or midnight wasn't anything I was very afraid of. I think people felt more safe then. There weren't so many guns and shootings and that kind of thing.
So, did McCarthy affect your family at all?
McCarthy did not, though we were very opposed to what he was doing. I watched the McCarthy hearings on television during the summer, and as did my father and the rest of my family. My father was a very firm liberal Democrat, and so he really disapproved. And when McCarthy finally got taken down a peg by the judge in the McCarthy hearings, it was a real coup, and we were all glad. I was not much affected, but I did read about particularly artists and filmmakers, playwrights, who were called up before the Un-American Activities Committee and were asked to reveal names, and if they refused, they were then blacklisted, it couldn't work. And I thought that all of that was really terrible. Most of them had not had that much to do with the Communist Party, though they might have joined in the 30s during the Depression when things really were bad, but they weren't supporters of Russia. It got really out of hand, and it was really awful. So I don't know. I think that right-wing, one of my friends' mothers that's I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Can you stop it for a minute?